Nuclear Regulatory Commission license renewal process, the scourge of the civilian nuclear power industry. This is Derek Clark with Group B, working with Justin Emmert and William LaSalle for the NUC 495 Nuclear Energy Engineering Technology Capstone class with Professor Massey at Thomas Edison State University. This is a discussion about applying for an extension, what's involved. The process for applying for license renewals is laid out in the NRC view graph in front of you. The flowchart seems simple, but the process can take in excess of 3 years. The first step, applying to the NRC, with a considerable amount of work involved in that. Next, calling public meetings, scheduling meetings, having meetings about environmental and safety reviews, CFR 51 and 54, conducting safety inspections, filing reports, having evaluation audits, reviews, environmental impact studies, statements, more public hearings, committee reviews, hearings, and finally, a determination can be made. My portion of the presentation focuses on the public involvement in the renewal process, the laws, state and federal, governing the nuclear power generation, infrastructure, and the financial ties nuclear power plants have with local state economies and national economy. So to start out with public involvement in the renewal process, the NRC clearly outlines the requirements for public involvement. There's a lot of information on their website about this. They state what's required, how it should be conducted. Local news agencies are usually used to communicate the meeting times and locations, and the public's invited to come and cite their case, either support or opposition of the renewal. Times and locations can also be found in newspaper announcements, posters, other methods of communication that the power plant might use. Meetings are scheduled and continue throughout the process, and the minutes are recorded for public record, and they're available for viewing online and in person at their headquarters in Rockville, Maryland. We'll get more into the specifics of what kind of information is put out during a meeting and what kind of responses the public could provide at a meeting. So Byron and Braidwood faced little opposition during their public meetings. They had attendees from government officials to business leaders to local residents, industry experts, all attesting to the importance of the plant and the vital role they play in their economy and their day-to-day lives. So reviewing all of the transcripts from the 4 meetings posted online, it was difficult to find a negative response. But when reviewing some of the other transcripts from hearings at locations like Crystal River, Florida, that happened to be a power plant that found some flaws in the construction and were up for relicensing, the responses at the NRC meeting were more typical of what I would imagine seeing in a movie. You had local people coming up to the microphone. One individual, Mr. Brinkman, He started off sounding like a local health physicist, discussing different types of radiation and exposure methods, um, talking about how coal releases de minimis amounts of uranium into the atmosphere. And then he goes on and on to eventually rant on about how the nuclear power plant had caused thyroid cancer in his wife, and it was very interesting. I highly recommend that you take a read on the Crystal River hearing transcripts. So all the documents are developed, transcribed, and kept at NRC headquarters in Rockville, as stated. Public viewing is allowed at any time. You can also provide formal comments there to the NRC for them to consider. And 10 CFR 2 provides the procedure for requesting a hearing for adversely affected parties. So environmental agencies have adjudicated to require Exelon to investigate the effects of plant thermal fluctuations in their local cooling mediums, their ponds, for mussel species in the area. And that's pretty much the only education that's happened at that plant thus far. So it's been a pretty clean, streamlined process for Braidwood and Byron. Federal and state legislation. So I recently read an excellent nonfiction book by Eric Schlosser called Command and Control. It's an in-depth overview of the development of nuclear weapons, and I learned a lot about the Atomic Energy Act and the development of the NRC. So the federal government developed the NRC and wrote the Atomic Energy Act to keep the public in charge or responsible for nuclear power. The power was considered too great to be held by the military, and the government believed that the civilian population should be the owners of that great power. So keep in mind that the NRC was initially developed for the people of the United States, but made a few mistakes during its young life and through the 70s and 80s. Um, it earned them a lot of distrust from the population, hiding secrets about tritium releases or rad releases or different events that had occurred at nuclear power plants across the U.S. So that's maybe one of the root causes of people's hesitation to be accepting of nuclear power. But the federal government continues to support nuclear power for the most part. The Department of Energy is fully funded by the federal government. They conduct huge amount of research in support of nuclear power development, fusion reactor technologies, naval nuclear power, sustainment, development of fuel material, uh, things of that sort. So there's a massive amount of resources being allocated into the development and sustainment of nuclear power plants in the U.S. The states are a little bit of a different story. While some states choose to use subsidies that are provided to them for clean energy sources for their nuclear power plants, many of them choose to use their subsidies for different methods of power like solar, wind, geothermal, things of that type, because of their inability to be able to dispose of spent nuclear material. The Yucca Mountain project, which was derailed several times over the past 3 decades, and eventually shut down in 2012, was vehemently opposed by Nevada legislature. Um, Yucca Mountain was supposed to be the answer to the United States nuclear power industry's spent fuel disposal problem. Because that was never fully constructed and put into service, uh, many of the states feel that they just don't have a viable way to get rid of their spent fuel, and it's considered a greater environmental hazard maybe than even the pollution being emitted by the coal burning plants in their states. California, for instance, faces huge amounts of opposition on the nuclear power front, but their carbon emissions have increased by 35% since they shut down their reactor plants. Um, just an indicator of people fighting one bad thing but creating another bad thing. So, to get back to Illinois as a state and supporting states, people are generally accepting of nuclear power where nuclear power plants are currently located. Some of the states are starting to warm to nuclear power, like Wisconsin just recently has passed a bill to allow future construction of nuclear power plants. Um, the new carbon emission requirements set forth by the federal government are pretty strict, and nuclear power is going to be a good answer for that, especially with the new power plant designs coming forth from GE Hitachi, like the economic simplified boiling water reactor. There's a lot of good choices. We just find a way to dispose of the fuel. Resistance at the local level is created by the culture of distrust mentioned earlier. People just don't know what nuclear power is really, what the problems associated with it are. There's just a stigma surrounding it, radiological contamination, radiation, exposure, leaks. Fukushima definitely contributed a huge amount to that most recently, but it's generally an excellent source of power, and I think the states will continue to warm up to this. So, Illinois created the Next Generation Energy Plan. They tried to get it through their legislation this year. They didn't get it passed. Exelon continues to threaten to shut down a couple of its reactor plants if the state doesn't try to help correct the $700 million claimed losses in recent history. Um, Exelon believes they should be getting some kind of credits for their carbon emissions, and they really just can't keep up with the oil and gas industry in Illinois since the recent decline in prices. Uh, Gas and oil are so cheap now, there's no way a nuclear power plant could be expected to keep up with the rates that would be available at an oil and gas burning plant price. The zero emission credit is something being pushed down by the federal government. Um, Different states are using it in different ways. It can be used to help fund nuclear power, but nuclear power is an extremely expensive source of power. It's also one of the only ways to provide a huge amount of energy at a pretty sustainable rate and a high reliability factor. State-run PPAs and tax incentives can make navigating the legislations and pretty difficult for energy providers trying to understand how low or high they have to set the bar to get into a power purchase agreement for an. So real quickly, let's go through the financial impacts. I just want to create a good picture for the last slide. Exelon Corporation, it's the biggest power company in the U.S. according to their numbers. Um, in Illinois specifically, I think their economic output was cited at a little under $6 billion, 5.9 billion, and Byron and Braidwood are right around the 1 billion mark each. That's a pretty considerable slice of a local economy. And their energy output's been sustained at over 93%, even higher for Braidwood. I think somewhere around 97%. That's really difficult for a coal or gas power plant to compete with. There's over 5,900 employees getting paid over 100 grand a year just at the Exelon power plants in Illinois. That's about twice as good as the average salary in Illinois. Um, that also creates a massive amount of tax income for the state and federal governments. Uh, those are both taxes that Exelon pays on its profits and earnings, and taxes that the employees pay. Almost 300 million in state tax income and over $1 billion in federal taxes. And that would be about 30 to 50 million for Byron and Braidwood each in each of the counties that are surrounding those power plants. 40% of that state income goes to the schools. That's an estimate. And the state needs to continue to comply with the stringent emission standards, so they need nuclear power. They need a clean, carbon-free emission source of energy. And nuclear power keeps the energy prices fairly low for customers. So the next two slides have numbers and view graphs taken from a report done by the NEI, Nuclear Energy Institute. And keep in mind that the NEI is a lobbying organization for nuclear power, essentially. They're funded with nuclear power dollars, and their opinion is most definitely skewed in favor of nuclear power, but at the end of this, I'll talk a little bit about how numbers this great can't really lie. So, Exelon makes its most significant contribution in labor dollars. So that means they're paying their employees to work there more than they're paying for anything else that they're doing. That equates to employees having money and spending it out in the local economy. They also pay for support from local engineering firms and environmental service agencies, and they estimate that 2 to 5 jobs are created for every single worker that's employed at their station. And they estimate that $1 of output creates anywhere from $1.50 to $3 of output in the local economy, and that's a pretty decent changeover rate. And the argument can most definitely be made that the closures would devastate local economies in the power plant areas. With that being said, and looking at the current view graph, which is an estimate in millions of dollars of Exelon's total output into the economy, in Illinois in 2015. Uh, you can definitely picture a mining town. So, if a gold town is created to support a massive influx of miners into an area, you can kind of imagine that as people coming in to make nuclear power. Uh, there's a massive amount of infrastructure put in place to support the mining industry in an area, and in this case, to support the nuclear power plants. You can look at how much money is being spent on construction, tech services, manufacturing, real estate for the employees that are living there. You have banks, gas stations, management companies, doctors' offices, information services, government infrastructure, um, public administration, restaurants, transportation, arts and entertainment. So much of this is around the money that's being pumped into the economy from Exelon. It'd be hard to argue that if if the power plants weren't in place, that the economy would fall to pieces, especially with such a high prevailing wage. With all that being said, there is a fine balance between Exelon and the state of Illinois. I think they both definitely need each other, and Exelon definitely provides a massive boost to the financial state of the Illinois economy. But Exelon also needs Illinois. It's a nuclear power friendly state. There aren't too many of those around nowadays, and it's definitely a good working relationship for the time being. Exelon does appear to have pretty decent ethical business practices, at least on their website and in local papers. You can find a lot of information about the good that the employees are doing, the good that Exelon's doing. I don't know what percentage of their profits they pump back into maintaining their ethical business practices, but there's definitely plenty of sources to verify that millions of dollars are being dumped into local charities and organizations, either from Exelon or from the workers at their power plants. Uh, Labor supports being given to volunteer organizations and support organizations. They do an excellent job of environmental stewardship. They have fishing tournaments in their cooling ponds that raise hundreds of thousands of dollars, constantly doing environmental studies in the area to verify that they're not having a negative impact. And there's an opportunity for advanced science, technology, engineering, and mathematics staffing at the schools and institutions around the area. They need to feed the nuclear power plant with quality individuals, and power plant individuals can possibly work in local learning institutions. The kids of the people who work in the power plants are getting scholarships from Exelon and grants, and local students in the community get the same opportunity to apply for those grants. So Exelon appears to be an excellent ethical business organization. So, in closing, I know this has been slightly long, but the nuclear power industry is in a little bit of trouble, and I think part of that's created by the information that my two partners on this report have dove into. Um, the bureaucracy of the NRC has created a massive roadblock for nuclear power plants to be able to continue to operate. And legislation has definitely put up massive roadblocks to prevent the construction of new power plants, and the NRC has a lot to do with that as well. So, unless there's some changes in order, the nuclear power industry could be on its last leg. Thank you, and that's all I got for right now.